whirled across the Alabama plains like a living thing, tearing through the sky with white veins of lightning that split the night in half. The Hawthorne estate stood alone against it, its windows glowing weakly in the dark, a decaying mansion clinging to old pride and older sins. Rain drummed on the roof like fists on a coffin lid. Inside, the candles shivered. Two women stood at the tall window of the parlor, watching the single lantern bob in the distance as a carriage struggled through the mud road. They were twins, Marjorie and Margaret Hawthorne, bound by blood but divided by everything else that made them human. Marjorie, the elder by minutes, carried herself like command made flesh, chin high, words sharp, eyes that calculated before they cared. Margaret's softer, moved like a dream interrupted, gentle voice, uncertain hands, always searching for something she could never name. The carriage halted at the steps, the door opened, and a man stepped down, all rain, soaked, shoulders squared, though his life had known nothing but burden. Elias, the last remnant of their father's will. The paper called him property, but what entered that house was a breathing shadow of every sin the Hawthorne name had ever hidden. Marjorie's voice broke the silence. "He's here." Margaret didn't answer. She was staring not at Elias, but at the shape of the storm around him, as if the night itself was following him inside. The front door creaked open. Cold wind rushed through the hallway. The butler's candle flickered as Elias stepped in, leaving a trail of rain on the marble. The fire hissed in the hearth. For a long moment, no one spoke. Marjorie studied him. "You've returned to Hawthorne land," she said, each word heavy with ownership and memory. "Yes, Miss Marjorie," he replied quietly. Margaret's eyes flicked up. "You remember us?" He nodded. "How could I forget?" Thunder cracked overhead. Somewhere deep in the house, a portrait fell from the wall. Later that night, the rain still raged. The sisters sat opposite each other by the fire, the orange light turning their faces into mirrors of doubt and defiance. Between them lay their father's ledger, his debts, his cruelty, his legacy. Elias's name was written there in faded ink, a symbol of everything they'd inherited but never earned. Marjorie closed the book. "The estate will rise again," she said. "We rebuild, we reclaim what was ours." Margaret looked into the fire. "Ours or his?" Marjorie's lips twitched. "Does it matter? We carry his name. That is both curse and crown." Outside, Elias walked the fields, the storm dying into mist. The orchard stretched beyond the fences, trees twisting like hands frozen in prayer. He paused near one, touching the barks. Guard split, burned at its base. Memories returned like fragments of nightmares, whips, commands, the scent of blood mixed with soil. But the plantation was quieter now. Too quiet. A sound broke the stillness. A woman's hum, faint and haunting. He turned. Through the fog, Margaret stood under an umbrella, her dress brushing against the wet grass. She looked fragile in the half light, like someone trying to apologize to the past. "You shouldn't be out here," Elias said. "I couldn't sleep," she whispered. "It feels different since you came." "I bring only memories, ma'am, nothing more." "Sometimes memories are all that's left," she said. "And sometimes they're all that ruin us." Lightning flashed again. For a brief second, Elias saw Marjorie watching from the veranda above, her expression unreadable, her silhouette sharp against the sky. The next morning, the air was thick with silence. Servants whispered of strange noises from the east wing, footsteps, doors opening though no one was there. The house had begun to breathe again, restless after years of quiet decay. Elias worked the fields. Each swing of the axe echoed like an unanswered prayer. From the porch, Margaret watched him, a mix of pity and fascination tightening her chest. Behind her, Marjorie's voice came, cool as the wind. "You're watching him again." Margaret startled. "I was only thinking." "Don't think too much," Marjorie cut in. "He's here to work, not to haunt your conscience." Margaret turned slowly. "And what about yours?" Marjorie's eyes darkened. "Mine doesn't need haunting. I live with it every day." For a moment, only the distant thud of axe against wood filled the space between them. Then Marjorie walked away, her footsteps echoing through the hall, steady, controlled. But her hands trembled as she reached the staircase. At the top, she stopped, looking down at the parlor where their father's portrait hung. The old man's painted eyes seemed to follow her, judging, approving, perhaps both. She whispered under her breath, "You left him to us. Was that your punishment or your revenge?" That night the storm returned. Windows rattled, the fire roared, and the house seemed alive again. Elias slept lightly in the quarters by the orchard, but dreams came in flashes, chains clinking, two identical faces watching him from the dark, whispers that merged into one voice. He awoke to footsteps outside. Slow, deliberate, a lantern's glow slid under the door. He rose, opened it. No one there, only the orchard swaying, the wind whispering secrets through the branches. Then he saw it, a single candle burning on the steps of the main house, as if someone had left it there for him. Or as a warning. Inside, Margaret sat awake by the piano, fingers tracing the keys without sound. Her sister entered quietly. "You lit the candle?" Marjorie asked. Margaret nodded, for light. For him. Margaret looked up, startled. "For this house," she said softly. "It feels too dark lately." Marjorie's eyes narrowed. "Darkness doesn't come from weather, sister. It comes from what we refuse to confess." Outside, the candle flickered and went out. At dawn, the estate lay silent again. Mist covered everything, the fields, the fences, the graves of those long forgotten. From a distance, the Hawthorne house looked peaceful, but up close its walls wept with moisture, its wood moaned with age. Somewhere within, a clock struck 6, the sound echoing through empty corridors. Margaret stood at her window, staring at Elias in the distance, a solitary figure against the fading fog. In that moment, she felt the strange pull of history, of choices made before she was born, of debts that could never truly be repaid. Behind her, Marjorie's reflection appeared in the mirror, and for a second Margaret thought it was her own, until it spoke. "Father always said we'd destroy each other," Marjorie murmured. Margaret didn't turn. Perhaps that's the only inheritance he was ever right about. The camera would drift away then, from the mirror, from the sisters, from the house itself, rising above the wet fields as the morning sun bled through the clouds. In the distance, thunder rolled one lie the storm had passed, but the air still carried the smell of it, wet earth, burnt cedar, and something faintly metallic that clung to the breath of dawn. The Hawthorne estate looked almost beautiful beneath the washed, clean sky, but the beauty was a lie, like fresh paint over rotted wood. Inside the house, breakfast sat untouched. Margaret poured coffee into delicate porcelain cups, but the clinking of the spoon sounded too loud, like the ticking of guilt. Across from her, Marjorie scanned a letter from the county office tax notices, debt reminders, the quiet handwriting of ruin. "We cannot keep the land without workers," Marjorie said at last. "We can sell part of it. Selling is surrender. Maybe surrender is all we have left." Marjorie folded the paper, the motion sharp as a knife. "Father built this house with order. I will not watch it crumble under pity." Outside, Elias was already in the fields, sleeves rolled, the morning light cutting across his back. Every swing of the axe was measured, almost ritualistic. He worked as if silence itself could be broken open by labor. The twins watched from the veranda, neither speaking. Margaret was the first to move. "He knows the land," she said quietly, "better than we ever could." Marjorie's tone chilled. "He knows how to serve it, not own it. Maybe that's the difference between him and us. He belongs to something real." Marjorie turned, eyes narrowing. "Do not romanticize him, Margaret. He's not a savior. He's a reminder." The day dragged on with the slow rhythm of heat and insects. By afternoon, the fields shimmered beneath a haze. Elias stopped only once, wiping sweat from his brow, noticing the faint outline of someone by the orchard fence. Margaret. She stood with a basket of fruit, hesitant, like a ghost unsure whether she was allowed to exist. He walked toward her, silent until close enough that the sound of cicadas faded. "You should stay in the shade, ma'am," he said. "I thought you might want something to eat." He looked at the apples in the baskets, small, imperfect, half bruised. "Thank you," she smiled, nervous. "They used to be sweeter when we were children." Land changes, he replied, so do people. Their eyes met, brief, steady, not longing, not defiance, just recognition. Two lives twisted by the same history, staring at its wreckage from different shores. Then Margaret stepped back, her voice barely above a whisper. Marjorie says we're rebuilding. Do you think this place deserves it? Elias glanced toward the mansion. Deserve, he repeated. I don't know if land feels mercy. Evening came heavy with humidity. Fireflies floated near the porch. Inside, Marjorie sat at her father's desk, studying ledgers by lamplight. The flame carved deep lines in her face, making her look older, carved from the same hard wood as the furniture. When Margaret entered, the light trembled. You were speaking with him again, Marjorie said without looking up. I was thanking him for his work. That's not what I asked. Margaret hesitated. You hear ghosts in every word, sister. And you chase them. Marjorie replied. Do you forget who we are, how this family is remembered? I'm trying not to remember at all. A long silence stretched between them, filled with the soft ticking of the mantel clock. Then Marjorie spoke, voice lower, almost fragile. I'm arranging a loan from Judge Ellison. He'll expect more than a signature. Margaret froze. You'd bargain with him. You know what he did to... Yes. Marjorie cut her off. I know, but survival has no pride left in it. Margaret turned away, hands trembling. There has to be another way. Marjorie's tone softened unexpectedly. There might be, and that's where he comes in. Margaret turned back, confused. Elias, he knows this land's yield. If he manages the harvest, perhaps the judge will see promise. He could convince them the estate still has worth. Margaret frowned. You'd give him that control. I'd give him responsibility. Control remains ours. Margaret whispered, that's not what responsibility means. Later, when the lamps were out, Margaret walked the hallway alone. Floorboards creaked beneath her bare feet. At the end of the corridor hung the old portrait of their mother, soft eyes, faint smile, forever fading in oil. Margaret stopped, whispering to the painting, how did you love him? How did you forgive any of this? The portrait gave no answer, but the air felt colder after she spoke. Outside, by the barn, Elias lit a small fire to keep away insects. The glow revealed scars on his forearms, pale threads of memory that no time could smooth. From the darkness beyond the fence a voice came, working late. Marjorie stepped forward, her dress untouched by dirt. Fields don't rest, he said, neither do debts. She studied him. You could help us, more than you think. He looked at her cautiously. Help how, ma'am? By making this land breathe again. You know its bones. Teach the others. Show them how to coax it back to life. And in return, you stay, safe, paid. She paused, free. The word hung in the air like lightning without thunder. Elias stared at her, expression unreadable. Freedom isn't something you give, Miss Hawthorne, he said quietly. It's something you stop taking. For a heartbeat, Marjorie's face flicker, anger, shame, respect, all twisted together. Then take it, she said, turning away, but don't let my sister think it was charity. As she walked back toward the house, the firelight danced across the hem of her dress, painting it in orange and shadow. Elias watched until she disappeared, then fed another branch into the flames. Sparks rose, drifted upward, and vanished against the dark. By morning, the deal was done. Elias would oversee the harvest. The twins would manage the accounts. The servants whispered that the mistress had made a pact with the past itself. Work began before sunrise. The plantation stirred like something waking from a long sleep, though whether it woke to life or to vengeance, no one could say. Days turned to weeks. The land responded, slowly, stubbornly. Shoots of green broke through soil long thought barren. Margaret began keeping notes, sketches of fields, rainfall, temperature, as if measuring redemption. She often met Elias near the well, asking questions that had less to do with crops and more to do with conscience. Do you believe places remember? She asked one afternoon. Yes, he said, and they wait for us to remember them back. And if we remember wrong, then the land takes what it's owed. That night, Marjorie returned from the judge's estate with signed papers and eyes that wouldn't meet her sister's. She locked herself in their father's study. When Margaret knocked, there was no answer. Only the faint sound of a woman crying who would never admit to it. Later, thunder rolled again in the distance, though the sky was clear. The twins stood together on the veranda, silent. The fields glimmered with fireflies, the house behind them breathing with the slow creaks of settling wood. Margaret spoke first. "We made a bargain." Marjorie's voice was barely a whisper. "All bargains demand something back. What will this one cost?" Marjorie turned her gaze toward the orchard. In the dim light, Elias moved between the trees, a lantern in his hand, the glow flickering like a wandering soul. "Ask the land," she said. "It always knows the price before we do." The wind shifted, carrying the scent of rain, though none had yet fallen. Somewhere deep in the orchard, a branch cracked, a clean, sharp sound like a warning. Both sisters looked toward the darkness, and for the first time since their father's death, they felt the house listen too. The camera would pull away then, the sound of cicadas swelling, the lantern's light shrinking to a single point in the vast, waiting night, until even that vanished, swallowed by the coming storm, sent time like a warning that the storm had only just begun. The morning sun over Montgomery County burned through the mist like a judgmental eye, prying open the secrets of the hawthorn plantation. The twin sisters, Margaret and Clara, moved about the estate like restless spirits, each haunted by last night's storm and the unease it left behind. The old oaks still dripped rainwater, the ground smelled of iron and wet earth, and inside the main house the air was heavy, thick with unspoken words and glances that lingered too long. Margaret sat by the parlor window, her fingers tracing the pattern of the lace curtains. She looked outward, but her thoughts were turned inward, deep into the maze of guilt and fear that had begun to grow inside her. She had not slept. Each time she closed her eyes, she saw the man again, Samuel, his shadow by the stables, the flash of his face illuminated by lightning. But what disturbed her most was not fear, but the feeling that she could not name, something between pity and forbidden fascination. Clara entered quietly, her reflection in the window appearing beside Margaret's. They looked identical, yet the fatigue in Clara's eyes betrayed that she too had slept little. For a long time neither spoke. Then Clara said softly, "He was outside again last night." Margaret didn't answer. Clara continued, "You saw him too, didn't you?" Margaret's hand froze mid-motion. "You shouldn't talk about it," she said. "But why? Everyone knows he works the night watch sometimes." Margaret turned sharply. "It's not about his work. It's about how you look at him." Clara's expression hardened. "And how do you look at him, sister?" A silence settled like dust. Outside, the horses neighed restlessly. Somewhere in the distance, the blacksmith's hammer rang, old, steady, final. Later that day, Reverend Elkins arrived at the estate. The old preacher had known the Hawthorns since their parents' time, and he carried with him the moral weight of the community. He was greeted by Margaret, who smiled too politely, and Clara, who avoided his eyes. "Your father left a fine legacy," the Reverend said, taking off his hat. "But people are whispering again, child. They say strange things happen here after sundown." Clara shot Margaret a look, but Margaret simply poured tea and asked, "What kind of things?" "That your fields are cursed." The Reverend said, "That your workers hear voices by the oak line, that one of your own men bears the mark of sin." Margaret's hand trembled slightly, the spoon clinking against the porcelain cup. "You mean Samuel?" The Reverend nodded gravely. "He's not like the others. The town remembers his father, how he disappeared. They say the bloodline carries sorrow." Clara spoke suddenly. "Sorrow doesn't travel through blood, Reverend. It travels through guilt." The Reverend turned his old eyes toward her, studying her closely. "Then tell me, child, what guilt is yours?" Clara looked down, her face pale. "The same as everyone's who was born here," she whispered. That night the wind picked up again. The plantation creaked, the shutters rattled, and the smell of smoke drifted faintly from the fields. Samuel was working near the barn when he heard footsteps behind him. It was Margaret, her lantern flickering like a dying star. "You shouldn't be out here alone," she said. "I could say the same," he replied. His voice was deep, calm, but his eyes revealed something wary. Like a man who knows danger wears a white dress, Margaret hesitated, her voice barely audible. "Do you ever think of leaving this place?" Samuel looked at her for a long time before answering. "Where would I go? The world outside this land don't take kindly to men like me." She nodded, unable to meet his gaze. "You don't belong here either," she said softly, "but neither do I." The silence between them was like a drawn blade, bright and trembling. Then Clara's voice echoed from the hill. "Margaret." The spell broke. Margaret turned, startled, her lantern shaking. When she looked back, Samuel was gone, swallowed by the dark. Inside the mansion, the air grew colder as the night deepened. Clara was waiting at the top of the staircase, her expression unreadable. "You went to him?" she said. Margaret's breath caught. "I only spoke to him. That's what I told myself too." Their eyes met, mirror images burning with accusation and shame. Downstairs, the clock struck midnight. The following morning, word spread that one of the workers had gone missing. His tools were found near the southern fence, his hat half buried in mud. No one saw Samuel for the rest of the day. By evening, the twins rode out to the far edge of the property. The cypress trees loomed like watchmen. They dismounted and called out his name, but the woods only answered with silence. Then, faintly, from the swamp beyond, came the echo of a man's voice, hoarse, pleading, fading. "Margaret!" Clara froze. "Did you hear that?" Margaret didn't reply. Her face was pale, her eyes wide. "We need to go back," she whispered, but Clara stepped forward, drawn toward the sound. "No, he's calling for you." Thunder rolled again in the distance. The ground trembled slightly, as if something beneath it had shifted. Margaret grabbed Clara's hand. "Stop, you don't understand what's happening here." Clara looked back at her. "No, sister, I finally do." They stared at each other as lightning split the horizon, illuminating the swamp in a brief, blinding flash. For that single second they both saw him, Samuel, standing knee-deep in the water, eyes fixed on them, his expression unreadable. Then the light vanished and he was gone again. Back at the house, the sisters stood by the window as rain began to fall. Margaret whispered, "Maybe he's dead." Clara's voice was low, trembling. "Or maybe he's waiting." Neither of them spoke again that night, but both lay awake, listening to the storm, feeling the weight of their shared secret pressing down heavier than the roof above them. Outside, the river swelled with the rain, and beneath its dark surface something stirred, something that would not stay buried for long. The morning after the storm was too quiet, almost sacred. The fog lingered across the fields like a pale shroud, and the air smelled of ash and decay. Inside the Hawthorne mansion, nothing moved except the slow ticking of the grandfather clock. Margaret stood at the window, her pale face reflected beside the rain-streaked glass. Clara's voice came faintly from behind her. "Did you dream again?" Margaret didn't turn. "It wasn't a dream. I saw him." Clara crossed the room slowly, her bare feet silent on the wooden floor. "You think he's alive?" "I don't know," Margaret whispered. "But I heard him. He was calling my name." The silence between them swelled until it felt like the whole house was listening. Outside, the fog began to lift, revealing the blackened fence where the missing workers' tools had been found. No one had gone near it since that night. Later that day, Sheriff Coleman arrived. He was a broad man with a weathered face and eyes that looked for guilt before they looked for truth. "Miss Margaret, Miss Clara." He tipped his hat. "There's talk in town about the disappearance. I came to ask some questions." Margaret forced a smile. "You think he ran off?" The sheriff shrugged. "Hard to say, but folks don't just vanish in daylight, especially not around this place." Clara's expression turned sharp. "What do you mean by that?" He studied her, then said quietly, "Your father's land has a history. Some folks say the earth remembers every wrong done on it." The words hung in the air. Margaret's knuckles whitened around her teacup. "We've done nothing wrong," she said. The sheriff gave her a long, unreadable look. "If you say so." He turned and left, his boots echoing down the hall. As the day stretched into evening, the mansion grew darker, the corners filling with shadow. The staff avoided the main corridor, whispering about strange sounds in the cellar. Chains rattling, a man's voice humming softly under the floorboards. By midnight, Margaret couldn't take it anymore. She lit a lantern and descended the narrow stairwell behind the kitchen. The air below was damp and heavy. Cobwebs brushed her face as she reached the cellar door. For a moment she hesitated, then pushed it open. The smell of wet earth and something older, something rotten hit her. She raised the lantern. The walls were stone, slick with moisture. In the far corner, where the light barely reached, something moved. Her voice trembled. "Samuel." The shadow shifted. Then a low voice answered, "You shouldn't have come." Margaret froze. The figure stepped into the light, his shirt torn, his face pale but unmistakable. "Samuel," she gasped, "you're alive." He didn't smile. His eyes were hollow, distant, alive. He echoed softly, "Maybe, but not the same." She took a step closer. "Where have you been?" He looked past her, toward the staircase. "Ask your sister." Margaret blinked. "Clara." But before she could say more, the lantern flickered and went out. In the darkness, she heard footsteps, 2 sets this time, and a whisper that sounded like her own voice. When light returned, Clara stood in the doorway, holding another lantern. "What are you doing down here, sister?" Margaret's voice shook. "He's here, Samuel. He's alive." Clara's expression didn't change. "There's no one here." Margaret turned wildly, raising the lantern again, but the corner was empty. The dirt floor showed no footprints. She looked back at Clara, her face drained of color. He was right there. Clara stepped closer, her voice calm but cold. "You've been dreaming again, Margaret. Father used to say you wander in your sleep when you're troubled." Margaret backed away, clutching the lantern. "Don't lie to me." Clara's eyes softened slightly. "Then tell me what you saw. Did he speak?" "Yes," Margaret whispered. "He said to ask you." Clara's smile faltered for just an instant, then returned. "You're tired. Come upstairs." But Margaret didn't move. "What did you do, Clara?" Her sister sighed, setting down the lantern. "Whatever I had to." That night, Margaret couldn't sleep. The house creaked and moaned around her, as if the storm had settled inside its walls. She rose from bed and walked to Clara's room, but the bed was empty. The window was open, curtains fluttering like pale ghosts. Margaret followed the faint glow outside, to the family cemetery at the edge of the orchard. There, among the crooked stones, stood Clara in her nightgown, whispering to the dark earth. Margaret's breath caught. "Clara, what are you doing?" Clara turned slowly, her face serene. "You remember what Father told us when we were children, that sins buried in the soil never truly stay down. They grow back, stronger." Margaret's voice trembled. "What sin, Clara?" "The one that built this house." Margaret stepped closer. The wind carried a faint sound, soft at first, then rising. It was humming deep and sorrowful, the same voice from the cellar. Clara smiled faintly, tears glistening in her eyes. "He doesn't rest easy, sister. None of them do." Margaret looked down and saw the ground shifting slightly beneath her feet. The earth was moving, pulsing as if something beneath it was alive. Clara whispered, "He's part of this land now, just like us." The lantern flickered, and for one horrifying second, Margaret saw what lay beneath the soil. A pale hand pressing up through the dirt before sinking again. She screamed. The light went out. By dawn, only one sister stood by the graves, her dress soaked in mud, her eyes hollow and blank. The other was nowhere to be found, and from the swamp beyond the orchard, the same low humming carried on the wind. The Hawthorne mansion was still and hollow that morning, its silence echoing through the halls like a confession. The staff had begun to whisper that only one of the sisters was left now. Some said Margaret had gone mad and wandered into the swamp during the night. Others claimed Clara buried her with her own hands. No one dared to ask which story was true, and no one wanted to know. The parlor smelled of dust and wilted lilies. Clara sat in Father's chair, the heavy velvet curtains drawn tight, shutting out the daylight. Her white gown was stained at the hem with dried mud. On her lap lay a journal bound in cracked leather, her father's old ledger, the one he had used to record every name, every debt, every sin. She ran her fingers across the inked names, stopping at the last one. Samuel. The ink had blurred, as if the name itself had tried to escape the page. A knock echoed from the doorway. It was Martha, the housemaid, trembling. "Miss Clara, the Reverend's here again." Clara's eyes lifted slowly, her voice calm. "Tell him to wait in the study." Moments later, Reverend Elkins entered, his hat pressed to his chest. He looked older than before, his expression drawn with concern. "Clara," he said quietly, "they're saying your sister's gone." Clara turned a page in the ledger without looking up. "People say many things in this county, Reverend." He stepped closer, his tone soft but firm. "Then tell me the truth. Where is Margaret?" Clara finally met his eyes, and for a moment he saw something cold flicker there, not grief, not shock, but something like release. "She's where she's always been," she murmured. The Reverend frowned. "And where's that?" Clara smiled faintly. "Under this roof." The way she said it made him shiver. He cleared his throat. "Clara, I've known you since you were a child. I know what grief can do to a heart. But I need to ask, who is this Samuel the townsfolk keep whispering about?" Her fingers tightened around the ledger. "He was one of Father's men." "Was?" Clara looked away. "He's gone too." The Reverend sighed, his hands trembling slightly. "Then let the dead rest, child. You can't carry this alone." Clara's voice dropped to a whisper. "The dead don't rest here, Reverend. Haven't you heard? That night, thunder rolled again over Montgomery County. The sky bruised purple and black, lightning splitting the clouds in jagged veins." Clara walked through the corridors of the mansion, candle in hand, her shadow dancing across the wallpaper like something alive. She passed the parlor mirror and paused. Her reflection flickered not in the glass, but behind it. For an instant, she thought she saw Margaret standing there, pale and silent, her eyes hollow and accusing. Clara turned sharply. "You're gone," she hissed. "I buried you." The reflection didn't move, but the whisper that came from nowhere, from everywhere, made the candle tremble. "You buried yourself." The candle went out. Downstairs, a door creaked open by itself. The sound carried through the hall like a sigh. Clara descended the staircase slowly, her heart pounding against her ribs. In the foyer, the front door stood ajar, rain blowing in through the crack. A muddy footprint marked the marble floor, small, delicate, and unmistakable. Margaret's. Clara backed away, whispering to herself. "No, no." She turned and ran toward the cellar door, the same door where she'd last seen her sister alive. The air was colder there, the stone steps slick with water. She lit another candle and descended, her breath visible in the dark. At the bottom, the scent of damp soil filled her lungs. She called out, "Margaret." The echo came back, distorted, low, almost like laughter. Clara gripped the candle tighter. "If you're here, show yourself." The flame wavered, then stretched unnaturally long, a whisper of heat, bending toward the far corner. Clara followed it. The dirt floor looked freshly turned, darker than the rest. She knelt down, brushing her fingers across it. It was soft, wet, and then she saw a strand of golden hair buried half in the mud. Clara stumbled back, the candle dropping from her hand. It hit the ground and rolled, its light flashing across something carved into the stone wall. Letters, crude, jagged, and bleeding moisture. "M. Hawthorne." She covered her mouth. "No, no, it's not real." From behind her came a whisper, faint, trembling, and familiar. "Yes, sister, it is." Clara spun around, but no one was there. Only the air shifting, cold and heavy, like a breath on her neck. She fled up the stairs, tripping as she went. The door slammed shut behind her with such force that the walls shook. Upstairs, the lightning flared again, and in that white flash she saw muddy footprints leading across the hall, up toward her room. By the time she reached the doorway, her pulse was roaring in her ears. The footprints ended beside her bed, and there, resting neatly on the pillow, was Father's ledger. Its cover was open to the last page, and the name that had once read Samuel now read Clara. She stared at it frozen as thunder cracked outside. Somewhere below, the cellar door creaked again, and this time it didn't close. The storm did not end with the dawn. It lingered like an illness, heavy and unrelenting, its gray light spilling through the cracks of the Hawthorne mansion. By morning, the house had begun to smell of damp paper and mildew, the scent of decay seeping into every seam. Clara awoke on the floor beside her bed, the ledger still open where she had dropped it. Her name scrawled in black ink that hadn't been there the night before seemed to breathe on its own, pulsing faintly, as though the page itself had a heartbeat. She rose unsteadily, her gown twisted, her hair clinging to her damp skin. Her voice was hoarse when she whispered, "You won't have me." But the house answered. A low, hollow creak sounded through the floorboards, one long groan, as if the wood itself were alive. Clara's eyes darted to the mirror. For a second, she thought she saw movement behind her reflection, a pale figure standing just over her shoulder. She turned sharply. Nothing. The maid, Martha, entered quietly, her face pale. "Miss Clara, there's something you need to see." Without waiting for permission, she led Clara down the hall toward the grand staircase. At the bottom, the front doors stood wide open. The rain had soaked through the entryway, pooling across the marble floor. And there, in the middle of the puddle, lay a single muddy handprint. Clara's throat tightened. "Who's been in this house?" "No one," Martha whispered. "I locked the doors myself last night." Clara stepped closer. The handprint was small, delicate, and next to it, faintly visible, were the edges of a footprint, bare, feminine. The candle in Martha's hand flickered violently, and for a moment Clara swore she could see another reflection shimmering in the puddle, a woman's face, pale and wide-eyed, staring up from the water. Clara stumbled backward. "Clean it, now, scrub it away." Martha hesitated. "Miss Clara, do it." Clara screamed, her voice cracking like a whip. The maid dropped to her knees, trembling as she began to mop the water, but no matter how she scrubbed, the print would not fade. The water only seemed to spread, darkening until it turned a deep rust-colored red. Clara turned and fled up the stairs, her heart pounding. In her father's study, she poured herself a drink from the decanter, the amber liquid trembling in the glass. She hadn't set foot in this room since before Margaret vanished. The air smelled of tobacco and mold. On the desk, beneath layers of dust, sat an old framed photograph, the twins at age 10, standing beside their father. She lifted it, staring at their young, smiling faces. "Father," she whispered, "what have you left us?" From somewhere deep within the house, a piano key rang out one note, soft but clear. Clara froze. The parlor had been locked for years. No one played since their mother died. She placed the photograph down and moved toward the sound, each step echoing down the long hallway. The parlor door was slightly ajar. A faint light glowed inside the flicker of candlelight, or something like it. Clara pushed the door open. The piano stood in the center of the room, its ivory keys gleaming in the dim glow. But what made her breath hitch was the figure seated before it, back turned, long golden hair cascading down a white nightdress. "Margaret," Clara's voice cracked. "No." The figure played another note, slow and deliberate. Then another. Clara stepped forward, tears welling in her eyes. "You're not real. You're dead." Margaret's head turned slightly, just enough for Clara to see half her face. The skin was pale, lips blue, eyes black as wet coal. "Are you sure?" she said softly. Clara's knees weakened. "You're not her." The figure rose, every movement stiff and unnatural. "You buried me," it said, the voice no longer entirely human, a blend of whisper, breath, and distant echo. "You thought the earth would keep your secret, but it keeps mine instead." Clara stumbled backward, knocking over a chair. "Stay away." The candles flickered wildly. For an instant, the figure vanished, and in its place, the grand piano began to play on its own, the same melody the twins had practiced as children. The notes rose and fell, weaving through the air like a lullaby turned into morning. Clara fled the room, slamming the door behind her. Her sobs echoed down the hallway as she ran, but every time she looked over her shoulder, she thought she saw a shadow moving just beyond the candlelight. That night, she couldn't stay inside the mansion. She took a lantern and wandered into the fields, rain soaking her hair, mud dragging at her shoes. The corn rows whispered in the wind. Each stalk, bending slightly toward her as she passed. In the distance, by the edge of the swamp, she saw movement, a faint glow between the trees. She followed it, her breath sharp and shallow. When she reached the clearing, she froze. Someone or something had unearthed part of the old family cemetery. The graves were open, the dirt freshly disturbed. Her lantern light revealed the headstones, her father's, her mother's, and now another one she had never seen before. Margaret Hawthorne, 1842-1860. The date chilled her blood. No, she whispered, that can't be right. From behind her, a voice said, it's right. Clara turned slowly. Samuel stood there, his face half lit, his shirt still torn and muddy from the night he vanished. You tried to hide what you did, he said, but this land remembers. She shook her head violently. You're dead. Samuel took a step forward, maybe, but not alone. The wind howled, the swamp water rippled, and from the open grave came the sound of a heartbeat, slow, deliberate, impossibly loud. Clara dropped the lantern, the flame dying in the mud. Darkness swallowed the clearing, and when lightning flashed again, both Samuel and the grave were gone. Only the tombstone remained, glistening in the rain, and beneath it, a second name slowly carved itself into the stone by unseen hands. Clara Hawthorne, she screamed, her voice swallowed by thunder, as the earth beneath her began to tremble. The storm did not stop. It was only beginning. The storm returned that night, heavier than before. The wind howled through the broken shutters, rattling the bones of the old Hawthorne house. Every hallway echoed with the same faint whisper, a name carried by the rain, Clara. She stood before the mirror in her father's study, her reflection warped by candlelight. Her face was pale, her eyes hollow. Behind her, the empty portraits of her ancestors seemed to tremble, their painted eyes glistening as though alive. On the desk lay the family ledger, open to the final page. The inked words seemed to crawl as if breathing, debt paid in blood. Clara whispered, it's over, it has to be. But the house answered a groan deep within its wooden ribs, like a sigh from the grave. The flames of the candles bent inward, drawn by something unseen. A soft knock came from the door behind her. She froze. The knock came again, slow, deliberate, patient. When she turned, the doorknob twisted on its own. The door creaked open, revealing nothing but darkness. And from that darkness, a voice emerged, faint and distant, like a memory returning to life. Clara. She backed away. Margaret. The voice grew clearer. You always thought you could bury me, but this house remembers everything. The mirror fogged over, as though a cold breath had touched its surface. Then, through the mist, another reflection appeared, Margaret, standing just behind her, smiling faintly. Her eyes glowed with the same pale shimmer as the moon outside. Clara turned, but there was no one there, only the mirror, only her reflection, but the reflection no longer moved with her. It stared back, lips curling, whispering words she couldn't hear. Then, slowly, the reflection reached out from the glass. The surface rippled like water. Fingers pressed through, dripping with black water and earth. Clara screamed and stumbled backward. The mirror cracked from the center, and with a deafening shatter, the glass exploded outward. From it, a rush of wind tore through the study, carrying whispers, cries, and the faint sound of a heartbeat that wasn't hers. The candles went out. Silence. Then, in the darkness, Margaret's voice again, closer now. You took my life. Now the house takes yours. A hands cold and unseen gripped Clara's shoulders. The floor beneath her trembled and split open, revealing a pit of mud and water, swirling like a mouth opening to swallow her whole. Clara fought to pull away, her fingers clawing at the floorboards. Please, I can fix this. Margaret's whisper came from everywhere at once, inside the walls, the ceiling, her very chest. You already did. The floor gave way. She fell, down into the black water, into silence. The storm raged above as the cracks sealed shut, leaving no trace of her. By morning, the Hawthorne house stood quiet again, but something had changed. The portraits on the walls, every one of them, now bore faint streaks of mud across their faces, as if the figures inside had wept during the night, and in the study, the ledger remained open on the desk. Beneath the final entry, a new line had been added written in trembling ink. 2 sisters, 1 sin, the debt is settled. The candle beside it flickered once and died. Outside, the storm rolled away, leaving the air still and heavy as if the land itself was holding its breath. For years afterward, no one dared to live in the Hawthorne house again. Locals said they could still hear voices inside when it rained 2 sisters, arguing, laughing, whispering secrets. And sometimes when lightning flashed across the fields, a pale figure could be seen in the upstairs window standing beside another identical shape, both smiling.